Right, requires a minimum $1 donation, and I advertise this as a free event. But we are not making any money from this. We are donating everything to Gaza Mutual Aid. But if you would like your money back, please let me know. That's not, you are still allowed to get your money back. It's not a forced donation. Thank you all for coming today. So what I'm going to do today is just weave through some of the influences that have shaped my thought in the past 5 years, starting from the pandemic, which is when I discovered the writer Zhuangzi, who's wrote one of the two classics, ancient classics of Taoism. And the Zhuangzi, as we'll see in the talk today, is the classic of Taoism that is more fable-like in structure and story-like in structure. And the Tao Te Ching, which we'll also hear from today, is more poetic and mystical in structure. So that's usually how the two of them are described. So I'm just going to... Oh, spoilers. Yeah, so today will be very casual. I wanted to put up this selected bibliography if you want to take a photo. I can send you the slides also later if you'd like them. These are some of the major figures I'm going to be thinking through today. There's going to be lots of texts because I feel like the full quotes are really important to include in the talk. But if you don't want to be confronted by blocks of text, you can sit more over in that area. You won't be able to see them at all. But I usually like being able to read and listen at the same time. Also, don't be afraid because this is casual outside the university, thank God. You can interrupt at any point and be like, can I get some clarity on that? Can you slow down at this point? I have a passionate disagreement with you on this point of cosmology. Feel free to interrupt and interject. So getting into the meat of what we're talking about today. This is the only photo that we have. I'm so sorry, it's a photo of Nietzsche, none other than Friedrich Nietzsche. So before we think about his transvaluation of values idea, I just want to quickly define cosmology, which is, it's neither a science nor a philosophy, but it's a word that describes a concern with thinking about the universal, thinking about the universe in a totality, in the sense of totality, and the universe in the sense of stars and the astronomical as well. So it has this double meaning of both being about what's out there, but also being about the universal. And the reason I enjoy using this word, or I feel like it's really nice to think with, is that it avoids the humanistic slant of discourses of psychoanalysis and philosophy. But it avoids them precisely by incorporating them. So cosmology, as I'll define it today, is an all-inclusive way of thinking. And all-inclusive means also trying to think outside the frameworks of anthropocentrism and humanism. It's also a scale difference from the humanities disciplines. And it also has a more systematic bent than an ordinary notion of spirituality. But you'll hear a lot of spiritual wisdom as well, intermixed with the more philosophical discourse. And I really like the way that cosmology synthesizes those things. So in terms of the transvaluation of values, cosmology, by my reckoning, expresses itself on our human scale as values. So values are a set of beliefs of how we conceive of the world, how we believe the universe operates, our particular set of perspectives. All of this constitutes our system of values. And our values underlie the ethical slant of our life. The reason I want to bring Nietzsche into this is because he, to my mind, is the Western philosopher who tried the hardest to break free of the Western prison. For him, it was a particular kind of German Christianity that he felt was decaying the soul of Europe, and that he felt was had multiple problems with how it thought about its own exclusivity, a kind of Germanic exclusivity. And the perversion, of course, is that the Nazis used Nietzsche's philosophy, even though Nietzsche was vehemently anti-German, or anti the way that German history was moving. But I think what I want to do today that's different than Nietzsche, who launches a very, very fulsome critique of Western philosophy and Western thinking, is I want to offer a positive proposal about what we can think of instead, and how we can think instead, rather than just doing a critique. But if you want the critique, Nietzsche's really good on it, Georges Bataille is really good on the Catholic roots of a lot of our thinking, and Adorno and the Frankfurt School are really good on the secular cultural industry side of things. So those are three thinkers that I think could be useful if you want to go further in that direction. So what I'm going to do today is quickly gloss over this constellation of capitalist values, playing on this idea of cosmology and constellation. So you'll see that the top two principles are the ones I'm going to focus on a bit more, but I'm not going to spend too much time here. The rest of it you can kind of read for yourself are pieces of ideology that work their way into capitalist thinking, and we're all familiar with them, we all struggle with them, we've inherited a lot of these values, such as individualism, identity, control of the self, productivity, a kind of death denial which becomes a life denial, money, content, abstract flows, cultural autocannibalism, which is culture eating itself and getting further and further away from the source. So that's a cluster of stars in this constellation of capitalist values. But the two I want to focus on today are principle of non-contradiction, principle of sufficient reason, which together create a form of thinking that is about the binary and the construction of the binary and the reinforcing of the binary. So the principle of non-contradiction, which we ascribe to Aristotle, says that a thing can not be itself and not itself at the same time. Right? So a house cannot be white and not white at the same time. Those are contradictions, and our reality moves through a series of non-contradictions. So Aristotle formulated this non-contradiction model of reality that was then taken up by a lot of Western philosophy as the basis for which reality is built upon. The cosmology that I want to propose is about contradiction. It's about the welcoming of contradiction, by contrast. The principle of sufficient reason is linked actually to the monotheistic God smuggled into the secular subject. So the principle of sufficient reason tells us that everything has a cause, and you can trace these causes right back to a great creator. That's the monotheistic thrust. That the monotheistic God is the first causer, or the prime mover, and from there you can trace a series of causes through logic and reason. And logic and reason therefore become ways that we understand reality under a kind of Western capitalist framework. And today I think we want to shift away from logic and reason and toward the unknown and toward what I want to formulate as mystical atheism. So that's just a quick overview of the capitalist values. I don't want to dwell too much on this, but are there anyone has any questions on this point? We already know these values. We live through them day by day. This is the juicier stuff, the mystical atheist values. I'm taking this term from one of my favorite contemporary philosophers, Brooke Zipperin, who also translated the Johnson and the Tao Te Ching, so he's a prolific translator, and he also has books of original philosophy, where he's doing a lot of this work of synthesis. So I'm really following a lot of his lead in this talk. So we're going to go through a lot of these terms one by one in the talk today. I'll just read them out loud right now. So mystical atheist values include integrated dualism, the principle of inclusive infinities, the middle way, Wu Wei, effortless action, the most famous Taoist concept, which is also following nature, Ziren, life and death conceived as a cycle, a return in a primal and atemporal sense of returning. So not a historical return, as in Make America Great Again, for example. Emptiness, interdependence, a monadic God, an immanent God, Spinoza's God in all things. So let's dive in deeper into each of the stars in this constellation. First, I want to give a sense as to what mystical atheism is, and why I want to call it an all-inclusive ecstasy. So this is Brooke Zipperin. What I will call the key monotheist idea is this: the mutual exclusivity at the ultimate level of being and non-being, of goodness and badness, of purpose and purposelessness. Atheism is the non-adoption of these mutual exclusivities, and atheistic monotheism is the religious ecstasy of this vision. So, when we think about the key monotheist idea, we're going to come back to this idea of the mutual exclusivity of being and non-being, of goodness and badness, that construct these binaries for us, that goodness and badness do not exist in the same substance, or do not exist in the same moment, or they do not exist in the same theory. What we're moving toward is a kind of atheism that does not adopt these mutual exclusivities. And where do these mutual exclusivities stem from? Following Brooke again, he says they stem from this problem-solving mind. So there's a theory of mind behind this kind of principle of non-contradiction. So the problem-solving mind is involved in the confrontation between self and world, the feeling of needing to intervene and resist and reshape. So this is the mind of planning and choice and purpose and control and correction. It is precisely the mode of experience in which the division between subject and object is felt most distinctly and vividly. But this is a singling out of only one occasional kind of experience, inflated into the characteristic of mind as such, even of existence as such. So this is a kind of hubris. It's our human faculty, what we believe ourselves to have, which is the ability to cognize and to solve problems, and to have control and to correct our lives. It's all of these things that we recognize as human, raised to the first principle. So what does this kind of thinking exclude then? He continues, he says, what is passed over as a candidate for first principle here, if we are in the market for a single first principle at all, is not only non-sentient elements like fire, air, water, atoms, void, indeterminacy, music-like harmony, warlike contradiction, inert stuff, and energy. Equally pushed aside are other modes of sentient experience: aimless daydreaming, neutral idling, rapt wonder, detached curiosity, inebriated immersion, one of my favorites, ecstatic embrace, reckless exuberance, unquestioning acceptance, exhausted submission, aesthetic awe, helpless confusion, erotic surrender, numbed disassociation, contented absorption, bumbling stupor, just to name a few. The myriad modes of existence that might instead have been projected and privileged as the ultimate source or model of existence, if indeed any such move had to be made at all. So I love this as a list of things that the controlling mind excludes, right? Why are these not taken to be the first principle? You know, you could say they're equally human to be in the state of exhausted submission or erotic surrender. But the dominant form of value system that we contend with has the controlling subject as its first principle. And in so doing, we ignore all these other possible first principles. Some of the ones he lists here, like fire, air, water, those are from the early Greeks, and also from the Chinese philosophers, as we'll see. So all of these are kind of shunted aside in order to privilege the subject in control of itself, let's say. So what mystical atheism is going to try to do is to reclaim all of these things on the same plane of value. as the controlling mind. So it's not that the controlling mind is bad or useless, but it simply does not need to have a transcendental position above all of this other stuff. So when I think about mystical atheism myself, I'm not really thinking against religiosity, like real living religion. I'm really thinking about the way that our secular society has a religious facet smuggled into itself. So after the death of God, what happens is that we believe that we ourselves are God. Right? We make ourselves into little gods that have control over our own lives and that have a transcendence over our land and our context. So I identify the problem not in religion itself, but in the kind of forgotten religiosity of the secular that smuggles in this kind of very basic Christianity or Christian misunderstanding. So we see here how there's an exclusionary first principle in the form of this controlling subject. What we are looking for, what we're seeking in the talk today, is an unprincipled inclusivity that doesn't begin in a humanist trap, that doesn't begin trapped in our perspective and in our value systems. We're looking for an unprincipled inclusivity where all things are already included in a monadic existence, where we are all interdependent with each other, and there's a sense of interbeing with all other things in the universe. And the reason that is because I cannot exist without you, and you cannot exist without the bathroom, and the bathroom can't exist without the mouse. And so everything is in the... Bonnie has mice on her patio, so it's relevant. So everything's existence depends on its otherness in order to exist. So through this chain of otherness, we come to a Buddhist and Taoist world where all things are interdependent. We move as one monad with the rest of the universe. So we're going to try to get there today in order to get ourselves out of this humanist slumber that we've been trapped in. So how do we get there? We have to start somewhere, which is primal chaos, the flows of the Tao. So you can think about the flows of the Tao. In other discourses, it's described as oceanic consciousness, that's Freud, or samsara in Buddhism. It's a beginning that's outside of time or not placeable in measurable time. It's a vision of prior nature, which for Taoists and many Buddhists is our true nature, actually, that we fall further and further away from this primal nature. And a lot of what we should practice, what we're asked to practice, is a return to this originary emptiness, to the Tao itself. There's something about the Tao that is unknowable, unknown, so it's not capturable by language. The very form of this as a talk is a kind of fool's errand. It's kind of contradiction, but we love the contradictions today. So that's a little bit of an introduction as to the substance of the Tao. Let's look at how the Tao Te Ching tries to image this Tao. The course, or the Tao, a gushing through, a jumbling together, an emptying out, yet harnessed for use by every random unfilled space. So deep an abyss, it seems the very source of the 10,000 things, blunting their edges, untangling their knots, blending with their shines, merging with their dusts. So translucent, a mere semblance of a presence, something without known parentage, an image of what precedes even the highest deity. So in this snapshot of the Tao, what I really love is, I really want to point this out, is the action of the Tao in the first 4 lines. So this word, the course, it's 3 simultaneous actions in one water word. In Chinese it's called chung, and it's associated with water. So the course is gushing through, so it's filling everything in existence. It's jumbling together, so it's doing this thing of mixing identities together and blurring the boundaries between seemingly distinct things. And it's also an emptying out. So it's also making space in every being for something other than itself. So the course is a plenitude, a hybridity, and a kind of emptiness. And this triple motion, having them both in one substance, which is the substance of everything, I think is really key for us to understand the force of this thing called the Tao. Let's look at another way of telling what the Tao is. This is from the Zhuangzi, the fable book. So the chaotic blob story, which is such a good story, it should be, instead of Paw Patrol, we should have this for our children. It goes like this. The emperor of the southern sea was called Swoosh. The emperor of the northern sea was called Oblivion. The emperor of the middle was called Chaotic Law. Swoosh and Oblivion would sometimes meet in the territory of Chaotic Law, who always waited on them quite well. They decided to repay Chaotic Law for such bounteous virtue. All men have 7 holes in them, by means of which they see, hear, eat, and breathe, they said. But this one alone has none. Let's drill him some. So every day they drilled another hole. A week later, 7 days later, Chaotic Law was dead. That's the best story ever. Does anyone, I don't want to make this participatory, it doesn't have to be, but does anyone want to hazard a guess as to what this story is about? If we're thinking about cosmology, what is the tale, the moral tale of this story? There's no wrong answer because...
Chaotic blob is the jumble, the Tao.
Yeah.
And the jumble is a singular monad.
Yeah.
And as soon as you put holes in it, it actually is shifting into multiple oblivions. Because it's the emptying out. You can't empty out chaos or kill it.
Beautiful. You can't empty out chaos to kill it. Yeah, so I think similar to that reading, or jumping off of that reading, Swoosh and Oblivion might represent conventional values for making distinctions in things. Like here are 7 holes. I can identify them. There are 7 of them and they're holes. You're already one step away from this void, this structure, this jumbling void. And not only do they represent conventional values, they can't stand to see something that doesn't follow these conventional values, that doesn't start to be distinguished and have identity. So in their kind of hubris, they believe that Chaotic Law would do better if it were just like them, if they had these human characteristics. Because humans have 7 orifices, according to Taoism. We can count them later during the meditation. So as Erica said, there's a way in which these 2 figures are emptying the chaos of its chaotic content. They're destroying the chaotic nature of the chaos. How do we heed the warning and not actually fuck with Chaotic Law? One of the methods that I've been really trying to think about and integrate into my own life politics is Wu Wei. Subtitle here I have is Do Non-Doing as Nature Does. It's a kind of paradox. So Wu Wei is literally translated as no doing, Wu Wei. Or it's also translated as inexertion. My favorite is effortless action. So Wu Wei is not doing nothing necessarily, but only doing what needs to be done. Like finding the most necessary way through something. Wu Wei is not only doing easy things, it's not going to things because they're easy for you, but finding the effortless way to do what needs to be done. So it's about finding that purchase of effortlessness. So let's look at Taoist inner alchemy's conception of this. Wu Wei. One cannot create emptiness. If one tries with all one's might to create or perpetuate this empty state, one will have already strayed far away from emptiness. Real emptiness is the condition of self-suchness, non-doing, and naturalness. It is the original state. There is no need for anybody to add anything to it, nor remove anything from it. You don't need to drill holes in the original emptiness. All that is needed is to leave things to rest in their own places. Let all phenomena be as they are, and liberation will manifest of its own accord. So this to me is a very succinct idea, or summary of Wu Wei. If one tries with all one's might, the trial, the attempt, the struggle gets you away from the state of emptiness. You can't try to be effortless. Right? So it has to go, bless you, it has to go by another route than a conscious effort that we attain Wu Wei. This is one of the hardest concepts to talk about because it has to be done. It has to be somehow lived and not simply theoretically transmitted from one person to the next. An example of a person doing Wu Wei is Cook Ding from the Zhongzi. So Cook Ding is the most skilled chef in the kingdom of Hui. And why is he the most skilled chef? Because he is the master of Wu Wei. So I'm just going to read this story. The cook put down his knife. He said, "What I love is the course, going beyond mere skill. When I first started cutting up oxen, all I saw for 3 years was oxen, and still yet I was unable to see all there was to see in an ox. But now I encounter the ox with the imponderable spirit in me, rather than scrutinizing it with the eyes. For when the faculties of officiating understanding come to rest, imponderable spirit-like impulses begin to stir, relying on the unwrought perforations. Striking into the enormous gaps, they are guided through those huge hollows, going along in accord with what is already there and how it already is. So my knife has never had to cut through the knotted nodes where the warp hits the weave, much less the gnarled joints of bone. A good cook changes his blade once a year. He slices. An ordinary cook changes his blade once a month. He hacks. I have been using the same blade for 19 years, cutting up thousands of oxen, and yet it is still as sharp as the day it came off the whetstone. For the joints have spaces within them, and the very edge of the blade has no thickness at all. When what has no thickness enters into an empty space, it is vast and open, with more than enough room for the play of the blade. When what has no thickness enters into an empty space. That is why my knife is still as sharp as if it had just come off the whetstone, even after 19 years. So this is the cook explaining his mastery to the king. A couple of things I wanted to point out in this story. There's a distinction between the imponderable spirit rather than the scrutiny of the eyes. The eyes being that faculty that often, not always, but often, is what makes distinctions, creates identities, and thinks that it recognizes things in the world. So here, Zhongzi is calling for a different kind of faculty, rather than scrutinizing faculty to be activated. So that's the imponderable spirit-like impulses that are at play. I think what's also really powerful in this story is this ideal image of something that has no thickness, this blade that has no thickness, entering into the empty space of the ox. And the cook knows the ox so well that it knows how to cut through it with emptiness touching emptiness. Right, so it's an impossible image because it's just two emptinesses flowing through each other. But what's really powerful to me here is that Wu Wei is a kind of ideal for us. It's not something that we can finally attain, like a kind of enlightened state, and then we simply move through life effortlessly acting all the time. It has a kind of contradictory nature in that often we will use Wu Wei to gain power and control, for example. We'll use it to get something for ourselves, and we'll capture it back under the same frameworks of power and control that it's supposed to get us out of. Another contradiction of Wu Wei is that there's a question, does Wu Wei require technique? Right, like, let's think of an improvising musician. In order to get to that effortless action, we may need to train ourselves in technique until the spirit in us can act with the full benefit of the technique that we've already learned. So there's a question about how much technique you actually need in advance for Wu Wei to come into the picture, and for Wu Wei to come more easily into you and through your body. So those are some contradictions in Wu Wei that I think make it actually even more interesting to try to put into practice, to try to put into play in our own lives, in the play of the blade of our own lives. So now that we're equipped with this knife as a method, let's enter the moral sphere of the middle way. And I'm calling this also integrated dualism, one of the constellations, one of the stars in our constellation. There's a lot of text on screen. I'm sorry for everyone who suffers through that, but I'm also showing you all some of the most enlivening and inspiring texts that I've read in the past 5 years. So I hope you'll see it as a greatest hits compilation of meaningfulness to me. So this is Qian Wu's pendulum. Qian Wu is a 19th century scholar describing the moral direction of Taoism. So what does Qian Wu say? Qian Wu says that although human affairs also go through endless transformations and never stay the same, there is a constancy or a center to them. If you try to separate yourself from this constancy or center and just move straight forward, you will find that it is impossible. For example, peace and struggle are phenomena that arise alternately in human life. They usually form a cycle, a back and forth, moving from peace to struggle and from struggle back to peace. Within this process, too, there is a center or a constancy. Struggle must search for peace, and peace must engage with struggle. So peace, which is close to struggle, and struggle that is close to peace are both capable of continuing, and both can be called good. But struggle that is far removed from peace, and peace that is far removed from struggle, are both far removed from the center, so that neither can form a constancy or attain any continuity. Going too far and not coming up to it are equally bad, and both of these can be called evil. Evil is just whatever cannot be constant, i.e. is not sustainable. The same is true of sickness and health. Usually people think a healthy person is free of sickness, but in reality, if there were no sickness, how could there be the work of metabolism, assimilating and excreting? The function of excretion is a type of sickness that is not far removed from health, and hence is good. The same is true of work and rest. To rest so much you can no longer work is evil and not good, and to work so much you can no longer rest is equally evil and not good. But people usually think of life as positive, death as negative, health and work as positive, and sickness and rest as negative, and then they start thinking that the positive side is good, and the negative side is evil. But according to the theory we are developing here, as long as evil stays close to good, it is no longer evil. And indeed, if good is too far removed from evil, it is no longer good. So when I read this, I was like, okay, I understand sickness and health, and struggle and peace, life and death. But when I got to good and evil, there was like something in me that balked at the suggestion that good and evil have to be this kind of co-substantial duality, this coexisting duality. And I was like, how could good and evil have this higher order of good and evil, right? Because what Qian Wu is framing here is that good and evil are actually at second order about the balance between a binary. Right? This is what's integrated about dualism. If a dualism is integrated, and you can stay close to the center or the constancy of something, then it can be called good. And that second order of good and evil applies also to the first order of good and evil. And this was a leap that felt really painful to make, I think, because in a world where we hang on to our notions of what good is. And we depend on these notions of good and evil for our politics and our political position, especially given the state of the world right now. And so noticing this reaction in myself to good and evil being conceived this way, that if good is too far removed from evil, it is no longer good, I was like, okay, let's investigate this more. What's going on here? What is this resistance made of? And Buddhism, of course, has an answer to this Taoist question on attachment. So this is Brooks Ziprin summarizing Tiantai Buddhism, which is a form I'll talk about a bit more later, which is a form of Buddhism that pushes Buddhist logics to their extreme end. So Brooke writes, if the inherent mutual entailment of good and evil is understood, there can be no more attempts to redeem the world by purifying it of its evil elements, whatever idiosyncratic or delusional definition might be given to evil. For it becomes manifest that the latter simply can never be done. We can never simply redeem the world by purifying it of evil elements. On general Buddhist premises, attachment is the root of all evil, and that means attachment to goodness is also evil. And then I was like, oh God, now I'm panicking, because I'm like, this gets me deeper into the problem. But again, like Taoism and Buddhism agree on this, that good and evil are mutually entail each other. There's not this conquest of good over evil. What?
There was someone appeared.
Oh, over there?
A creature. A creature.
Is it your son? Is it a human creature?
Well,
it's like a plague doctor mask. It's his Halloween costume.
Thank you for the timing.
yeah.
Since we're thinking about this second order of good and evil, I just want to pinpoint some of the values that are going on here. One of which is continuity and sustainability. So why is it important to keep to the center of things and to the center of these dualistic elements? It's because that's the way that we sustain our own longevity, sustain our own vitality, is not by chasing the either extreme of experience, not chasing the impossible ends of experience, but keeping to that point where good and evil are side by side with each other, or that they exist in a balance with each other. So again, this is a contrast to the conquest of good over evil that you just saw demonstrated right there. So the greatest evil then becomes extremism for Taoism, or attachment for Buddhism, rather than good and evil itself. Let's look at a few more examples of reframing moral structures before we conclude with a few points about politics and practice. So neither low nor high are available for transformation. This is the 8th chapter of the Tao Te Ching. Now we're thinking the opposite way. What is the highest good? If attachment is evil, what is the highest good? The highest good is like water. Water is so deft, so good at benefiting things by never competing with them, by putting itself low where none want to go. That is why it is so close to the Tao. In dwelling, so good at finding the place. In centering, so good at finding the depths. In interacting, so good at being kind. In babbling, so good at being true. In aligning, so good at shaping up. When put to work, so good at gaining power. When making a move, so good at finding the moment. Because it is never contending, it is always beyond reproach. So this is one of the most famous chapters of the Tao Te Ching, because this is where water comes up as a kind of moral substance. the highest good is like water. Why? Because water is not afraid of putting itself low. It'll go to the swamps, it'll go to the deeps of the ocean. It goes where no one with conventional values wants to go, because conventional values put the high over the low. But what's really cool about water is that the reversal of these values, low is high, also includes highness itself as part of this value system. It doesn't exclude the high places, because water can also go high. By putting itself low where none want to go, it's also able to go high or low. So this is what I call an inclusive reversal. It reverses things and then includes what it's opposing in its new logic. So water can be anything by this definition, but it's about transformation. It's about the possibility to become something other than it is. And so water can be tradition and rationality and all the things that I've mentioned above are principles of the capitalist value system. But it doesn't have to be anything, it's not confined to being anything in particular. It is available for transformation. And so it's raised in the Taoist system as a kind of highest good, a kind of ideal substance. The Zhuangzi has a different tone around this. Master Eastwall asked Zhuangzi, "Where is this course you speak of?" And Zhuangzi said, "There is nowhere it is not. You must be more specific. It's in the ants and crickets. So low. It's in the grasses and weeds. Even lower, it's in the tiles and shards. So extreme, it's in the piss and shit." This is the John Waters moment. So the shit and the treasure are equal modes of expression in this infinity, monadic infinity that we're dealing with. There's not a way to privilege one over the other when we're considering the necessity of all these things interdependently. Right? That's why Zhuangzi says, the Tao is everywhere. It's in the paddock grass, it's in the piss and shit, it's in the tiles and shards. And I think this is it's captured really well in the fact that when you call something shit, it's low quality. But now we've reclaimed the word shit, so such that when we say something is the shit, it's like the best thing ever. So our grammar has somehow accommodated itself to an Eastern cosmology. We'll conclude just with 3 angles on the idea of compassion. Really thinking about how we bring this cosmology into our daily lives and bring this cosmology into our understanding of how we have relationships with other people and how we have relationships with ourselves. So I just want to explore these three angles on compassion. The first one is from Tiantai Buddhism, and I've already spoken about that a little bit. So, in the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha tells us that all sentient beings are equal to himself, and all will become Buddhas. He further tells us that even before he seemed to be a Buddha, back when he was only a Bodhisattva, he was actually already a Buddha. The same applies then to us who will be Buddhas. We appear only to be on the way to Buddhahood, but the way toward Buddhahood is already Buddhahood itself. However, one must become a Buddha in order to have always been a Buddha. This is a kind of mind thing. To be a Buddha is to have a Buddha past. To become a Buddha in this moment is to see all other moments, and indeed all other beings, as expressions of Buddhahood. Becoming a Buddha right now makes it so that one has been a Buddha in every moment of the past and future that one considers from the perspective of one's present Buddhahood. To be a Buddha is to see how all forms of being are ways of being a Buddha. So this is Buddhism taken to its absolute logical extreme. everything that we do in this life or in past lives or in future lives are all on the way to becoming Buddha. So even detouring away from whatever ideals of Buddhist lifestyle, that's still a necessary detour in the grand history, in the grand scale of all time itself, all interdependent unities of time and space, such that everything that we do cannot help but put us on the path toward Buddhahood. If we fall into addiction, if we fall into despair, if we fall into any kind of sin you consider sin, all of that is absolutely necessary on the path toward Buddhahood. And when I read this idea in Tiantai Buddhism, I thought it's absolutely one of the most compassionate ideas possible. Because there's nothing we do that doesn't have a purpose toward this unified Buddhahood in which we are all already participating in. Because to become a Buddha later in life means that we are one already. So that's one angle on compassion. I'll just read one more because we're running really hot on time. And this is Nietzsche, going back to Nietzsche, Nietzsche's affirmation, Nietzsche's yes. So Nietzsche asks us to imagine, what if some day or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, this life now, as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more. And there will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh and everything unutterably small or great in your life will have to return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Or have you experienced a tremendous moment when you would have answered him, you are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine? So Nietzsche's, I think it's more than just a thought experiment, it's his whole cosmological ethics, is for us to say, if we are asked to live our lives over and over again forever, this is the eternal recurrence, can we say yes to that proposition? Can we say yes to the demon that is offering us an eternity of the same lifetime on repeat? To say yes to this, to say yes to the life that we live and have lived, is basically to affirm everything in your life, all the pain, all the suffering, in one plane of existence as yes. Yes, I take this all, and I will take it all again forever. And this, to me, this is an extremely powerful ethical scene, because it changes the moralizing that we do to pain. It changes the moralizing that we do around the good and the evil. And it's Nietzsche's invitation for us to affirm any experience that we undergo. Which is not to say that we don't have the capacity to change it, that we're just passive subjects in the world. But whatever we've already gone through and are going through, how do we say yes to those things? Right? So putting the Buddhist idea that we are all Buddhas next to this idea of affirming the eternal recurrence. I just want to close this part of the talk by just talking really briefly about politics and practice. And I guess I've been thinking a lot with many of the people in this room about Palestine. I've been thinking a lot about how to have this research in cosmology not only coexist with, but really inform politics, the politics of contention. Because a lot of the politics that we're asked to engage with in the struggle for Palestinian liberation, is about contending with the systems that already exist. It's about doing this fight and not taking the middle way, but kind of performing this oppositional logic, which is, how the system wants to trap you. It wants to trap you by forcing you to fight it on its own terms. What this cosmology, this constellation of cosmologies that I've presented today, what it offers me is a way to think about how deeply serious it is to do politics, while also not being necessarily attached to the outcomes of the politics, or not necessarily attached to the outcome of any particular action that I do. And to take attachment away from politics while still doing everything you would do based on your own value systems. So is it possible that taking attachment away from our actions actually makes them clearer, more effortless, less of a burnout situation? And to what extent is attachment a way that we step on our own toes, or that we become fraught and entangled in things that we can take a more of a distant approach with, while not changing anything that we actually do? Right? So it's not about changing what we do, but about a kind of attitude of attachment, about bringing more of a wu-wei approach, even to something like protest or direct action. And this is something that I'm continuing to think about, and I would love to hear all of your thoughts on this. For me, politics is the question: when do we have to use the capitalist value frameworks against them, and when do we need to slip outside of those dynamics of contention and fighting? So this question of practice, I think, is also, practicing this cosmology feels to me like it's in deep tension with the capitalist value systems that we exist in. And I think it's really important to do things like, for me it's like qigong, meditation, any number of these actual practices that we have at our disposal. But it's also a practice of dailiness, taking our own perspective seriously, but always being able to zoom out further and further into a universal perspective, and saying that my perspective is deeply serious, but it's also among the infinity of possible perspectives that coexist all at the same time, right? That there's a simultaneousness of all these perspectives and all their truths intersecting and crisscrossing. And so that to me is a practice that's not about doing something for 20 minutes or 30 minutes a day, and that's very important. But it's about how do you bring this cosmology into the very fabric of how you think about things, how you respond to events in the world, and how you form relationships. I think one of the images that always sticks to me is Abbas Kiarostami's Close-Up, when there's a dramatic scene with a bunch of actors and humans, and then a boy kicks a spray can down this hill, and for like 5 minutes you're in the world of the spray can, and your humanistic framework is completely decentered as you watch the spray can gazing at you, and you think, like, what is the animate life of this object? And that to me is one of the thrusts of mystical atheism, is to be invited into the ecstasy of something other than yourself, and to constantly be invited and pushed outside of your own perspective and framework over and over again, and to accept those other frameworks as part of this web of interdependence. So I'll stop my portion of the talk there. It's a lot of stuff, I think. And would love to have a conversation without it being a forced Q&A, if that's possible. Just because, we can also talk more informally, but if people have questions or if they have contributions, they do not have to be questions at all about any part that I presented. If you want to answer some of my questions that are on the screen. How do you connect cosmology to your daily life? What are some alternative values or practices that you're engaging? How do you receive this constellation that I've just presented? Is it confusing, implausible, inspirational, provocative, or otherwise? Question for me, a question for everyone else. Yeah.
When you're talking about the scholar who is describing things as good and evil. Sorry, I forget who was talking about that.
Yeah.
And you're talking about the second level of good and evil.
Yeah.
Where things that are more extreme or further away from the center are either good or evil. Do you think that those words are being used in like a moral sense, or like how is good and evil being employed in that way when it drops to like that second level? If that makes sense.
It's moral in the sense that the evil is what is not sustainable, and the good is what is sustainable.
Right.
So it's moral not in the sense of like a God that tells us what is good or evil. But good or evil are defined by sustainability and the ability to be continued over time.
So would you say that that's like Tianmu's morality?
That's the sustainability and longevity are kind of at the core of his morality, I guess you would say. And so the Taoists have a concept of vital nourishment, where they want to live as full a life as possible in this lifetime, and a healthy life. So that is one of the values that are at play here. Sorry. Any other questions?
Sort of adding to that, like sustainability of life specifically.
Sustainability of life, yeah. Which means attending to death within life and the death functions of the living organism, which I think is a really cool way to think about excretion and all these things.
That kind of has like a Christian background to it too, like this exclusion of death, or trying to capture death as something separate from, because that should kill life.
Yeah, where it's trying to create a conceptual divide between life and death, or life and the afterlife or something, yeah. And you don't find that in these immanent philosophies. Yeah, Dave.
When you were talking about Wu Wei, you mentioned it being contradicted. I forget exactly how you described that. I was wondering if you would relate that to the application of non-attachment in political work. If somehow the non-attachment in the political work is a type of Wu Wei that would make the work more effective.
Yeah, for me, non-attachment and Wu Wei are very close together. And here I'm blending Buddhism and Taoism a little bit. Because I think attachment often makes us pour more effort into something, right? And put more laborious work into doing something. So there's a kind of way that attachment entails effort.
And the contradiction is that the effectiveness of Wu Wei makes it a power.
Yes.
But as a power, it's no longer Wu Wei as such.
Exactly. Like you can be used by rulers to rule their kingdom well, and then they're using it for personal purposes. They're using it for kind of selfish purposes, rather than the kind of more ecological purposes that we're describing here. So it could be hijacked, for alternative uses, I guess.
Do you think there's something about Wu Wei that's not as hijackable? As like putting a lot of effort or attachment into something?
Yeah, I think like in our current society, I don't know who is out there hijacking Wu Wei. I think a lot of people are more going the opposite way and like working themselves to the bone in order to try to get what they want. But there might be some people who are, have sinister uses for Wu Wei that I don't know about.
You're asking me.
Yeah. Or I know sinister uses of Wu Wei.
Well, if Wu Wei could allow you to choose a more effective action, because you're implying that
Yeah.
a non-effective action is you expending unnecessary energy. But if somehow it would be the thinking principle to some degree to decide which is the superior action.
And more efficient action.
Right, and maybe that takes it away from the attitude aspect.
And it makes it calculated or conscious.
To some degree.
Is it possible to logically choose Wu Wei though? Like in terms of like logic or thinking, like you can't if you were to apply that principle to like a mind-body split or thinking and feeling, right? Like Wu Wei would not be
presented,
of logic.
it's presented as somewhat antithetical to
Mhm.
conscious and logical choice in the Taoist texts.
Yeah.
It's that imponderable spirit-like impulse, right? That
Mhm.
you can't get to that through a series of logical deductions or conclusions.
Mhm. Yeah, you mentioned that, like you have to actually experience it, you have
Yes.
to feel it.
Yep.
How do we recognize that in the world? Like as a practice, going to your, one of the questions that you have in terms of like a life practice, you know, there's different kind of traditions that you can practice, but like, do you have a practice, like a, I don't know, noticing or action, like, how do you attend to the feeling of the way that probably exists in all of our lives already in some form?
You could set an intention around a specific activity or series of activities, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And set an intention in a way that doesn't undermine the wu-wei-ness of the thing.
That would be the hope.
Maybe in some way, like for Wu Wei, I guess for me, the way I kind of understand is like something like martial arts, for example. Like you're not exactly like there's a certain point where like yeah, you're thinking of like striking, you're trying to like hit like get a hit on the other person, but eventually like your sense of time kind of changes within. So you're not really focusing on like hitting the other guy, because you're just mostly focusing on like on striking. That's like kind of what for example things like Tai Chi, for example, or Bible John is not exactly focusing so much on like blocking the strike per se, but you're mostly trying to like redirect the strike away from you, kind of like bringing that momentum in a different direction.
Yes.
But in that moment, it's like you're not thinking of like that instantaneous like something about to hit me that kind of way. You're just more thinking of like just like trading strikes, like in a sense, and that kind of flow state, I guess, might be like what how I imagine like Wu Wei, because like you're not really thinking so much of like I gotta block it like this. Like you're thinking more of just like moving in like with the least effort possible, and as well as like the least kind of like really resistance possible. Because like the moment you're like stuck in a certain like position, you've already made yourself kind of vulnerable. Like someone can already like move around you and exploit a position that you didn't notice.
Yeah, I think martial arts is a cool example because you're often using the other person's effort as a supplement to your own, right? So you're mostly using their strength against them rather than adding more of your own.
Mhm.
That's the ideal of many martial arts.
There's also that kind of Nietzsche's yes, right? The, like,
Affirmation,
yeah, affirmation, taking something in and not being attached.
Yeah, like affirming the punch that's being thrown at you.
Yeah,
And like,
it's like, yes, okay.
yeah, so now what do I do with this?
Yeah.
punch?
I just, it made me laugh because I was like, that's the yes and rule of like stand-up.
Yeah.
or
Improv comedy is the place where Wu-Wei exists. If you ever see good improv, they're like Wu-Weiing it.
I guess when you were talking about Nietzsche's yes, one thing I thought about was this kind of idea of like the endless everyday. I mean, there's a lot of media, at least in Asia. I'm sure there's probably some media in like the West that's kind of like dealt with it as well. This idea of like the endless everyday, where like nothing happens and like the same kind of like conflicts arise, the same kind of like alienations are sort of there, and thinking about that, like I remember one of the genres that kind of explores this is like the Japanese kind of like denpa-kei, which has come out with a lot of things like visual novels, anime, movies, that kind of thing. And one of the questions that genre kind of grapples with is this idea of how to coexist with this kind of like general endless everyday that many of the people in these worlds are kind of like alienated from. They don't feel like they always feel like they're always separated from. I mean, in a sense, like Denpa is this idea of like this kind of disconnection from the world, despite like a more like connected kind of like lifestyle with technology and things. So like one of the works one of the famous ones, like Subi, he talks about this kind of idea, this kind of chart, this kind of like charged to live happily, like despite like all these all these kind of like atrocities that kind of like happen around us. Unfortunately, I wish I could like better summarize the kind of like gravitas that got to the moment where like Minakami says like to live happily, but just those like that simple kind of like not necessarily a commandment, but a simple kind of like intention,
Right.
like kind of
An attitude switch.
yeah, it kind of brings an interesting kind of like small approach, like small step, and kind of how to grapple with this like everyday that's filled with these kinds of like these kinds of like conflicts, which is things that we don't understand, things that just kind of like forces into these kinds of ways of being that might not be like the healthiest, I guess.
Mm. Last comments?
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Okay. And I don't know if I can formulate it right.
Yeah.
But it was in the other slide where it was talking about detachment to good is evil itself. Like it's the attachment.
Yeah.
The attachment to goodness is also evil. That made me think about liberalism
Mm.
and the idea of yourself being so good is more important than political outcomes or like good in the world.
Yes.
Um,
It's a good real
How
emphasis.
how can this cosmology help me think about assimilating the fact that inhumanity is so real in humanity, in space humanity, and like
Inhumanity is so real in humanity.
inside humanity,
Yes.
and like what's vulgar is so like human, and it's so repulsive, and my impulse is to eject, but I shouldn't just eject and be like, this is like, those who do evil are so out, I can't even, like, how do I actually bring it in?
Yeah.
Like, what do I do with can you help me?
Well, I'm having these cosmology consultations.
In March, we have lots of time.
But I would say that this idea of ejecting the evil comes from the value system that we're given.
Yeah.
Which is that which is good cannot be evil, right? It's this
Yeah.
hard divide between the two. And that creates subjects that can't deal with their own evil, right? We can't deal with the evil that exists within us. We externalize evil and we blame other people, or we see other people as the badness that we can't take up within ourselves.
Mm.
So this is a kind of integration practice, I think.
Mm.
It's a kind of like being able to affirm your own evil and say, yes, this is part of me, actually. There's a little liberal inside of me, perhaps. Just to use the worst evil possible. And what do I do after I say yes to them? Instead of constantly trying to chase it outside of my soul, which will never work, because we can't attain goodness, actually.
Well, and is it less, I don't know, I find the language of evil to be fraught as opposed to choosing something like everybody having the capacity to do harm, for instance, or like
Yes.
something like focusing much more on like, I guess, agential action as opposed to like evil being this like sort of like a floaty cloud-like abstraction in some ways. Like I feel like I like to get more specific with it to make it more tangible somehow. I don't know if anybody else is also sort of struggling with the broad strokes of like evil showing up here as a concept.
I think this is also something I should have looked at the translations of in the original languages, in the Chinese especially, and to see how that translation does and doesn't work.
Yeah.
If we're good and evil, that's the blind spot.
Sorry, just on that, I do think there's something about, I know what you mean, through the color, I know what you mean, but I think for me, evil and good are more of forces or directions. I actually think about them spatially in terms of a movement, like evil is away from what is sustainable, it's actually a move away from center, right? So if you think about them as directions rather than, they're not objects, but exactly like you said, we have this conditioned thinking of like, the devil is evil, or this terrible person is evil. That evil is not residing within something, but it's a kind of movement that we engage with.
That's how I think they're used here. But
Yeah.
there are terms that are extremely overloaded and overdetermined by history of use and by a Western history of use.
Mhm.
That I can see where you're coming from too. They're very not neutral to
But
begin with.
part of that reclaiming it to the origin, to that is important as part of that, because the more we continue to consider them as these things, we're still engaging with this like subject-object divide that is like part of the larger capitalist cosmology, let's say, that we engage with.
Totally. Yeah. Last questions.
This makes me think that Jean Genet is very Taoist.
Say more.
Well, really that like low, lying low, like going into the depths, finding
Yeah.
that this incredible beauty in shit and piss and
The lecturers and prostitutes.
yeah, like and all the kind of the people who are sort of finding this incredible beauty in these people who were generally shunned, whether it be the Palestinians or the Black Panthers or the people in penal colonies and these kinds of things.
Yeah.
And finding this way of really making it so rich and full of beauty and life and love and lust. And
The risk of that is fetishistic gaze, I guess. Which, I mean, that's a good first step, I think. And not to say that Genet ended in fetishism, but that's a possible kind
for sure.
of trap of like venerating the low as the high.
Yeah, I don't see it as just a complete inversion or something.
You know.
I feel like that's never really the goal in his work. Like
Yeah.
there is some veneration, but I think because it needed to happen, like because it was so dismissed.
It's more complicated than veneration. Let's do, for closing, just one Qigong move together. So, because we've been sitting for an hour. We'll have a Qigong workshop with Matt and my Qigong teacher, Jonathan Najemian, in November at some point. So that's the practice side of this talk. So if you're interested, please let me know and I'll put you on the mailing list. And that will be a sonic Qigong and sonic meditation. Okay, so let's just stand up and do one single move. This only requires you to be like this and not like this.
And just be careful the artwork on the walls.
Did you just do nervous laughter? Would you play the song?
Yeah, I'm trying to get to it. But there's the ads.
So we'll start just by grounding ourselves, by rooting our feet onto the floor or the mat.
So can you pass me the speaker?
And bending your knees slightly, we're going to feel a thread moving from the top of our head, the top of our skull, down to our perineum.